Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tell Your Story. I'm your host, Todd Nesloney. I'm an elementary school principal in Texas, and every week I seek to bring you guests whose stories have inspired, encouraged, or challenged me in one way or another. And I'm thrilled this week to have my special guest, Dwayne Reed, on with us. Dwayne, tell everybody a little bit about who you are.
Hey, Todd. Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure, man, on this wonderful Sunday evening. I am an educator out in Chicago. I live and work on the west side of the city. If anybody's familiar with Chicago, the west side is the best side. I am 27. Oh my gosh, I feel so old. 27 years old, but I feel like an 18-year-old at heart. Most people might know me from my music video that went viral in 2016 called Welcome to the Fourth Grade. If you haven't, make sure to check it out on YouTube. And yeah, man, I just love life, love kids, love being goofy. And that's a little bit about me.
So first of all, don't ever say you feel old when you're 27, because then that makes me feel really old. And I'm not much older than you.
That's it.
That's hilarious. So you've been in education for a few years now. When you were growing up, was that always kind of what you envisioned your path being, was in education?
No, not at all. So I actually didn't even intend to get into education until around 2012, 2013, when I was about, 19, 20. So when I grew up, I wanted to be in management, or I wanted to do something that was involving me, I guess, I don't want to say running people, but helping people, serving people, but not teaching. I'd never thought about teaching. I didn't even like school when I was going to school. I didn't like my teachers. I didn't feel like they were teaching me anything. I didn't feel like they liked me, though I was smart. So getting into education was just like, whoa, it's funny. I remember talking to my girlfriend who is an educator, and I remember telling her like, hey, see, I'm about to go into teaching. She's like, what? You're going into teaching? So, yeah, completely caught me off guard and everybody else around me.
So what was that initial thing that kind of was the idea behind, you know what, maybe this is something I'll consider doing with my life?
Yeah, man, I dropped out of college. I was at Purdue University in West Lafayette, and I dropped out. And I was like, I don't know what I want to do with my life. So I had taken one of those like online aptitude tests. And it just kept coming back to like service industry, like nurse or doctor. I'm like, well, that's not going to happen. I don't like blood. Teacher, and it kept coming back teacher. So I just YouTubed day in the life of a teacher, day in the life of a Black teacher, day in the life of a Black male teacher, just things like that. And I was like, you know what? I can do that. I like kids a lot. Let me try that out.
So talk to me a little bit about that backstory of what you mentioned just a second ago. You know, you talked about how school, elementary, middle, junior high wasn't a place that you really liked going to at all, which then led to you also, you know, kind of stopping your college experience. What kind of things contributed to that kind of experience for you?
Yeah. So when I say I was growing up and I didn't like school, it was more so the structure, I guess, the monotony of it. I didn't really have too much beef with any of my teachers, again, because I was quote unquote smart, or I knew how to play by the rules. So I kind of easily went through that. But what I didn't like about school, again, the monotony, the structure, I have to be here doing this and that at the exact same time that I'm supposed to be. And then I guess what played into my decision, I guess, to get into education was like, man, I can be a change agent in this. I can, if I still put on that 10-year-old thinking cap mind, I can now go impact other 10-year-olds in the way that I would have wanted to be impacted. I can essentially be the educator that I needed. So that's what kind of was like, you know what? Let's go ahead and try this on. Let's see what's popping with this. So
now you mentioned that viral video as well. Talk to me a little bit about that and how that came to be.
Yeah, so I got into education, obviously. Ended up going back to school, went to a state school. Shout out to Eastern Illinois University. And once I got there, they're talking about, hey, here are the things that you can put into practice when you go into your new school year. And I started student teaching, and I was like, you know what? I'm coming in with a bang. You're going to know that Mr. Reed is your teacher. Not going to be some, hey, I'm Mr. Reed and I'll be your teacher this semester. No. It's, hello, I'm your teacher. My name's Mr. Reed and it's very nice to meet you. Like, so I recorded a song and a music video to accompany it. And we put it out on the next day, literally the next day, it went viral. I'm getting calls from everywhere, everybody. And it was like, yeah, man, this is how Dwayne Reed breaks into the education game. Duh.
I mean, if you're gonna start on the right foot, that is the way to start for sure. I think that's awesome. So, did you send it out to your students before you had met them, or was it like when they came into your room the first time? How did your students have access to that?
Yes. So I put it out on YouTube prior to the students coming. So I put it out maybe 4 days, 5 days before the school year began. And then because it had gone viral, like Good Morning America viral, the student, and then we sent it to the parents too, but they're like, okay, cool, whatever, teacher. But once it went viral, then everyone had to kind of like key in and be like, oh, this is who your teacher's going to be. Okay. So they had already come in knowing who I was, knowing about me, and being super excited for the school year they were about to participate in. And again, that was the whole goal. Like, my biggest thing is the relationships. The relationships matter. Relationships are key in education. So the first piece of that is I need my scholars to know exactly who I am. And I feel like I accomplished that with the Welcome to the Fourth Grade video. Oh, we got this super spunky, outgoing, loud, energetic musical teacher. And, for all the single mamas out there, this fine teacher that's going to be teaching. I kid. But yeah, man, just giving them information on who I was and what I was about. And I feel like that was a great way to start our relationship.
I love that. So, what do you think is probably one of the biggest lessons you've learned your years in education so far?
That's a really good question, Todd. I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned in education, you see how I reframed that question? I've been on the news a couple times. One of the biggest things I've learned in education has been how often and how much kids teach us. I look back on my first year, man, I learned more my first year than I learned in any education course I ever took. And this is not to knock any education courses or classes or schools or anything like that. This is just to say, like, real life is what's going to teach you, like the actual practical being in the classroom, being amongst the kids, having to deal with the Friday night calls of issues of trauma. Like, that's what's going to teach you stuff. Your kids challenging you on stuff that you had never even thought of. Like, dang, bro, I never literally thought of that. Like, and you having to humble yourself and say, man, a 10-year-old taught me something today. Yeah. So I think that's the biggest thing that I learned, that kids are just as much teachers as I or anyone else would be.
Now, you mentioned something just there that I think is something that is very similar between my environment that I work in with my students and yours with your students, is that the amount of students that we work with that deal with trauma on a daily or at least weekly basis. How do you see that affecting what you're trying to do with them?
Yeah, man, I think trauma just is obviously traumatizing. It impacts and infiltrates every aspect of their lives, and not only their lives, but of an educator's life. As a teacher, you begin to feel overwhelmed if you love your children overwhelmingly, right? So I love my kids overwhelmingly, so that when they bring anything to me, I become overwhelmed by that sometimes. Or it helps me kind of reshift my thinking. For example, if I know that you were just shot at over the weekend, one of my scholars told me, you know what, we got shot at over the weekend, we had to run and dodge and hide. I know that some of the mess or the crap or the issues that you bring into the classroom that week might have something to do with the fact that you almost lost your life. And this is not to say that every single school is like this, or that not everybody experiences these things because I'm in a city or you're in the rural, blah, 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 blah. No, this is to say that trauma, regardless of what it is, if it's traumatizing, has an impact in the classroom and in the schools. And I think it's important for educators or people in general to look at the whole situation that a child is going through and then assess. Don't just assess, man, they kicked the chair. All right, but why did they kick a chair?
Yeah.
Has a parent or has an adult in their life kicked a chair and thrown it at them, and that's all that they've seen. So now they're only, projecting what they've seen, and how does that impact our relationship in the classroom or the school? So I think those types of questions are the ones that need to be asked. Like, how is this traumatic experience, or how has your traumatic life impacted you? One of my scholars, she said the other day, man, I'm tired of life. You ever heard a kid just walk up to you and say, I'm tired of life? I haven't prior to getting into education. Like it just grieved my heart hearing that. So I think we as educators have to like really listen to our kids deeper than just the actual things that they say, but some of the stuff that's going on in their lives as they bring it into the classroom, into the school. So that's how I think we should look at trauma.
Well, and I'm so glad you talk about it that way because, as a principal, I see a school from the whole perspective. And, when I was a teacher in the classroom, I had my 75 students every year. I got to know them. I learned their stories and, like you said, experienced the pain alongside them and took on some of that. But as a principal, you see it even bigger on a bigger scale, the amount of CPS calls that are have made, the amount of abuse. I mean, even in the last year alone, the amount of students that have made suicidal comments or threats and that we've had to make wellness checks on and things like that. But I think the point that you make that is so powerful is a teacher has to, instead of just jumping to consequences for a child's poor behavior choices, get to know where that's coming from. Because you made the perfect comment. You said, a kid kicked a chair. That doesn't mean that you jump straight to a consequence because that may be what they see happen every single day at home while mom and dad are fighting is that dad kicks a chair or mom kicks a chair. And that's the way that they know to deal with their emotion in that moment. And if we're not taking the time to get to know kids and know where they're coming from instead of just jumping straight to you have a consequence right now. It's like, did you even take the time to see what they came from this morning?
Yep.
Because I remember very vividly, there was one day we had a kid come in. It was just a really rough morning. And a lot of people in that child's life was not having patience for them. And about midway through the day, when the kid just had a full-on breakdown, they brought him to me. I sat and talked with her only to find out that on her way to school that morning, her family had been pulled over and her father had been arrested right there on the spot and taken to jail. Yeah. And it's like nobody had taken the time to figure out that that's why she was so emotionally unstable that morning. So I love what you say about getting connected and learning about them instead of just assuming that they don't know how to behave.
Yeah, and what it does for educators, for teachers, is it actually helps them in the long run. If I put aside my desire to be punitive, to punish you because you disrupted my classroom or because you were talking and blah, blah, blah. If I put aside that innate, immediate desire that I have in exchange for, if I get to know you and I get to understand you at a deeper level, now when this happens again, I'll be more accommodating. And then you as a child, you see me being accommodating and you might respond and be like, oh, shoot, I've never experienced this. Let me do right by you now because you're actually choosing to pay attention. I bet you later on, you're not going to have those issues no more. Perfect example. At a scholar, I'm talking about, woo, interesting. And he was just a hothead, if you will, just snap, snap, snap. But when I sit down and I get to know him and I get to know, okay, this is why you're snappy because you see mom do this with you and your younger siblings. And this is why. And then I begin to talk to him like he's an actual human being and that he's not a statistic, like he's not just some case that I'd studied previously and, blah, 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 3,000. But he's actual real person. Once I get to that level, we moved on in the school year and it's like, man, he's coming to me, Mr. Reed, let me tell you about this, 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 and this. And he's playing like I'm the counselor or, the health advocate for him, which I am. So it benefited me later on if instead of just jumping to here's your consequence, no, what's your story? Now, how can I use your story to better both of our situations?
I love that so much. And I'm so glad that I love every time I hear more educators talk about that, because I think the more of us that can talk about it from that perspective, the less we have of these teachers talking about my kids are so out of control. I don't know what to do. Because my first answer is, have you made a home visit? Yeah. Have you talked to the child? Did you eat lunch with them? Did you ask? So I love what you're saying here. Now I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk about something. There aren't a lot of men in elementary education, but especially not African-American men. How do you find your way into fighting the stereotypes, but still being passionate about you and what you believe in your culture and still doing that? Do you find a lot of pushback when you try to do things or when you start to say things being an African-American male in elementary education?
Yeah. So let me go macro and then let me go micro.
Yeah.
So at the macro level, obviously, I find a lot of pushback for anything I do as an African-American male in America. The way I do things is going to be perceived however the person is going to perceive it. You know what I'm saying? So I can be passionate and that might be seen as angry.
Right.
Or I can be loud, and that might, I can be expressive, and that might be seen as loud or doing too much. So whatever I say, even on my social media, on my Twitter, on my Facebook, I have to kind of do my best possible job to sprinkle it with like, I need y'all to understand, like, I'm Black and it's not changing. And I need to understand the dynamic of how Black and white and Mexican, how race works in America. And I get a lot of pushback. Often, sometimes people are in my inbox, like, why are you speaking about these things? Because they matter to me. Because I'm Black. Because they matter to my students. Because 99% of the school population is Black. So I'm going to talk about issues that impact the Black community. And, you know, I'm not going to apologize for that. So I'm sorry if you feel offended by it, but I'm not sorry for saying it. So that's at a macro level. At a micro level, man, I think it's so crucial to have teachers of color, particularly male teachers of color, Black teachers, more specifically. I read a study out of Johns Hopkins University, which said that if if an inner city child has a Black male teacher, or just a Black teacher, but a Black male teacher between the grades of 3rd and 5th grade, they are 30% more likely to graduate from high school.
It's so funny you mentioned that, because that was the exact thing I was just about to bring up, is that, you know, we talk about so much male educators, but that study specifically talks about having a Black male educator regardless of the race of the child.
Yes. Like that's wild to me, but it's not wild to me, because at the end of the day, when all you see on the media is, for example, the attack of the Black man, and Black men are being locked up and Black men are being thrown into prison. If, you know, my scholars, that's literally all they see in their lives. For me to come in and be like, nah, I'm breaking that. Like, yeah, I can talk like this. Yeah, I can level with y'all, but you're going to get this education. You're going to get this work. So they might not see it now, but later on, they're going to be like, dang, I actually paid attention because I had a teacher that was like real with me, but was still challenging me. Like, dang, I actually decided to want to go to school. I had one scholar, he said to me, this is a scholar who the year before would fall asleep every single day in class, just because home life situation wasn't the best, yada, yada, yada. But I call his mom for some reason, and his mom says, and by the way, Mr. Reed, I just want to let you know that XYZ, he says he loves coming to school now, and he stopped falling asleep. He would fall asleep every now and again. I'm not gonna lie, but he stopped falling asleep in class, and he actually doing his homework and blah blah blah. And I think you cannot minimize the impact that specific people have on your life. Like, Todd, if you come to me as a principal, you specifically are going to impact my life differently than some other random person would. Like, so I think we cannot minimize the impact that specific people have on specific people. In this case, Black kids or white kids or Mexican kids or whatever kids, the impact that Black male teachers or Black female teachers or teachers of color have on them cannot be minimized.
Well, and I love the fact that you, like you said earlier, don't keep yourself from talking about things you're passionate about just because it may make people uncomfortable. And, you know, as a white male in this country, I'm very aware of the privileges that are afforded to me. And I've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years just really beginning to educate myself. And the biggest thing that I've been learning is that these conversations have to be had. And too often, especially those of us that are white, we steer away from the conversation because it's uncomfortable, or because we have these preconceived notions that we don't even want to look at the privilege that we have, or we don't even want to look at our own white fragility and then have those difficult conversations where just because you are thinking like this does not mean you're a bad person. We just need to be more educated and be realizing those things. So I appreciate you and you just standing up for that and talking about that, because I remember very vividly, you know, we spent a lot of work at my school this year. Really diving into culture and race. I mean, 85% of my student population is minority students, or the minority majority. And so but my staff is about 85% white. Sure. And so we spent a lot of time really diving into those conversations about race, culture, religion, and how those affect the way we educate students. And it made a lot of people uncomfortable. Yeah. And it made a lot of people who weren't even at my school, who were at the district level or in other parts of the community, uncomfortable that we were having that conversation at the schools. And I was just like, what? It's 2019, people. We should be able to talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
Do you find that even where you are, sometimes those conversations are difficult with people in your life?
So so I was in Chicago, and it's actually, obviously very liberal and
Right.
progressive, and these conversations are happening all the time as they need to be.
Mhm.
But there are pockets and situations, pockets of people in situations where it's like, no, this is pushing a little too much. But I think it's because people have held onto, or they idolize balance, or they say, if they or they hate the idea of confrontation.
Yeah.
And one thing that I want to communicate, that I often communicate, is just because I disagree with you doesn't mean I don't like you.
Right.
Just because we have a difference of opinion on something doesn't mean I hate you, doesn't mean you're racist. For example, if I'm talking to a white person. So I don't necessarily run into too many issues with my circles in education, or just in my life in general. It's more so when I'm communicating with people outside of the west side of Chicago. So when I get online and I just mention, for example, that I post a picture of my kids and I say, man, these kids are so beautiful. I remember I posted something. I said, man, these black kids are so beautiful, wanting to emphasize their blackness and their beautifulness, if that's a word, because I think those two things being conjoined is important. And then people all in my inbox, well, aren't all kids beautiful? Well, white kids are beautiful too. Like, yeah, kids are gorgeous. But I really want to emphasize the fact that I think that these particular black kids are absolutely stunningly beautiful. So it's like more so when I start to get into, the internet world and start to branch out, or when I visit places to speak and they're like, well, and I'm like, well, no, hey, here's what this is. And, kind of get with it or get lost kind of thing. Because
Exactly.
any time to just waste on dealing with, like you said, fragility, like my students are dying, being locked up, are having to deal with all of these things left and right. I don't have time to deal with you being sensitive that I brought up race. I don't. And I don't care how you feel about it.
And I love that so much. I know even people listening are going to think that's going to come off different ways. But I think, when something is so personal to you, just like with the trauma stuff, it was traumatic to you.
Yeah.
So that doesn't make it more or less traumatic to somebody else. It just matters what it is to you. And what's passionate and what's important to you is it's yours. You have to own it and you have to live it every day. And we're not all living the same stories. So we can't disregard somebody else's emotional attachment to something because we're not living their life.
Mm-hmm.
I want to end on one question, Dwayne, and I try to end every episode with this. If there was something that you wish more people knew or understood, what would that one thing be?
Oh, does everyone else feel like, oh, that's so hard? You can't ask me that. That's how I feel right now. Todd, can you throw that back at me again? What's one?
Yeah, if there was one thing that you wish more people knew or understood about anything, what would that one thing be?
Gosh, I don't want to say this, but I feel like I have to because it's the only thing come to mind. I wish that people understood that minorities don't just want a handout. We want opportunities. I wish people understood that it's not as easy as just, buckling up our bootstraps and just working hard. Because working hard for you, Todd, is different than working hard for me. Mm-hmm. And I think if people understood that, and again, I don't want you to cut corners for me. I don't want you to lower the bar. Man, I just want equity. I want the bar to be the same for both you and me. Mm-hmm. So I think if I put that in my mind, whenever I'm dealing with a scholar, whenever I'm dealing with a student of color, if I put in my mind, you know what, I'm not going to bring these preconceived, stereotypes or notions that I have about them or their race. I'm just going to treat them. I just really wish that people understood that, I don't know, man, we deserve a fair shot. Like people, I see people look at my scholars when we're out somewhere and they'll be like, oh, they're so, or, oh my gosh, they're so. And it's like, why don't you just see them as kids? Right. Just a really quick example, because I'm pretty sure that didn't make sense. But we was at a museum, and we're at a museum. It's the end of the school year. Kids are running around, just aloof, just in a room full of mirrors. And then this white couple is like, oh, I wish they could just I don't know, sit down somewhere or blah, 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 blah. But 5 minutes earlier, I seen these white kids running around, and these same white couple didn't say nothing. And it's like, I just want a fair shot. If you're gonna tell the black kids to sit down somewhere and stop running around in a museum where they're supposed to have fun and be kids, that's cool. Tell the white kids the same thing. Like, be fair, equity. And that just made me really mad. So I don't know, man. I just want everybody to be treated fair. Like, yeah.
That was really powerful, Dwayne. I admire your work. I've been following you for a while. I know we haven't interacted a ton, and you don't know that your work has inspired me in so many ways. But I was thrilled when you agreed to come on because I just so am a believer in what you're doing and the message you spread. And I love your genuine honesty, where it's not meant to be abrasive. It's not meant to be in your face, but it comes straight from you, your heart, your core. And I really appreciate that part of you. So thank you for all that you do and for coming on tonight.
Man, Todd, thank you, man. Just the opportunity, obviously, to talk to even one other person in the world who I know is impacting scholars. Like you said, principal, have all these different scholars. Like, thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me a voice. I think that's a really big thing. So appreciate it.
Awesome. And thank you, everybody, for listening or watching another episode of Tell Your Story. Remember, you can check out past episodes on iTunes, SoundCloud, or YouTube and hear all the other brilliant guests I've had on as well. Remember, I hope this story has inspired you to get out there and tell your story because, like I tell you every week, every story matters. Have a great night, everyone.